to make up for Wednesday's class, which unfortunately was canceled. And this video is essential for everyone to watch. I've broken it up with documentary footage to make sure that it's a little more pleasurable to view, but this part is focused on the Maya civilization. And what we're going to see is that the period that archaeologists thought was the high period of Maya civilization, that is known as the Classic period, which dates from about 250 to 900 AD. This was the period for a long time that archaeologists thought that the Maya state actually emerged. And a lot of the archaeology that's been done in the past few decades has shown that actually the Maya state emerges earlier than this period in what's known as the pre-classic. Right? So there were already important elements of the state, cities, and other elements of building, power, ideological basis of the elites already existed in the pre-classic, even before this classic period. All right, we're looking at the Maya lowlands, so we're essentially looking at this area here, which comprises today Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Belize, right? And for the most part the pre-classic and classic cities were down in the southern part. Later on, after the Maya collapse, there are Maya cities that emerge later in what's known as the post-classic, right? Not such a creative titles here, and they're more in the north. Chichen Itza is probably one that you've heard of. Tulum is right on the coast. Right. We'll talk just a little bit about Chichen Itza, but we're focusing on the pre-classic and the classic period. Right. Some of the major cities of the classic you might recognize. Tikal is one, Palenque is another, Copan is another one that's fairly well known to many people. Right. And we're going to really focus on these. We're going to talk about some finds from Palenque. We're going to talk about some finds from Copan. Very briefly on Tikal and a little bit on Bonampak, but we're not going to go into all of the cities. Okay, a lot of the earlier theories to explain why the Maya state emerged, don't really apply much anymore now that the state actually emerged in the pre-classic and not in the classic. Warfare may have played some role, but it doesn't look like there was trade from Teotihuacan that basically influenced them to form a state. Even though they did have contact with Teotihuacan, they were emerging on their own. Population pressure doesn't look like it was a factor. Agricultural intensification, right? Trade among elites. A lot of what you find in terms of the basis of the state is the ritual power of kings was already there in the pre-classic, and this is one of the most fundamental parts of the state in the Maya, as we're going to see. Very important site that was discovered is that of El Mirador. It's a very, very large site, much larger than many archaeologists thought would even exist in the pre-classic. One of the most important things that they found at El Mirador is a stucco decoration on the side of a temple, which you can see here. This is the archaeologist pointing out this stucco frieze. What it depicts is actually a piece of the most important myth in the Maya world called the Popol Vuh. And this is one of the most essential myths of the Maya, and it's also a very important myth in understanding the power of kings in the Maya world. And again, what's interesting is this is something they thought only comes much later. They thought the Popol Vuh was even created later, maybe during the Classic. But what this shows is, this dates the pre-Classic by a couple hundred years. It shows that this important myth was already in place in the Maya world.
This is going to be something you haven't seen before, but it is going to give us an opportunity to show you some of the most amazing features of pre-classic iconography and pre-classic ideology in full manifestation.
Here we go. Oh my gosh! This
has not been stabilized, it hasn't been consolidated, it's just the way we excavated it.
Wow.
We're in the process now working with this, but you're looking at a rich cosmological scene.
When did you discover this?
Just a few months ago. So you're the first professional company to ever look at this art.
This is the creation story.
This is the
of the
creation
Mayan
story,
people.
and it goes back to at least 300 to 200 BC.
What was it like, just that moment of discovery when you realized what this is?
Immediately I saw the head. I realized with the number 1 and the scroll out of the, I thought, can this be the Popol Vuh? I was stunned. They had a series of pools with 2 waterfalls, dual waterfalls that fell into another pool. And then the side of their pools were richly decorated with extraordinary art on 2 levels. It shows the wealth of their society.
That they could put this in a drainage.
In a water pool.
For hundreds of meters.
That's right.
Around the whole pool.
Yeah, that's right. This keeps on going.
The whole reservoir. You see something like this and you realize that we've only opened up less than 1% of the site of El Mirador. Dr. Hansen has basically rewritten the Mayan history books that said the top of the society, the renaissance of Maya was the classic. And actually, it was 1,000 years before the pre-classic. Were not primitive villagers. These were the real founders of the Maya Empire.
Yeah, these were the major players. And this was essentially the capital of the world in the Western Hemisphere.
Right here.
At one period of time. Yeah.
It's amazing.
The hero twins were conceived when their mother, Ichkik, spoke to the decapitated head of their father, Unakpu, who spit on her hand from a cacao tree. Unakpu had been killed by the Death Lords of Xibalba, the underworld. The hero twins became great ball players, and to bring their father back to life, they challenged the Death Lords of the underworld to a game in Xibalba. The twins were permitted to play the ball game only after they had survived the dangerous trials set for them in the underworld. Using great skill and cunning, the twins won the ball game, and this allowed their slain father to come back to life as the maize god. The hero twins left Xibalba and climbed back to the surface of the earth. They continued up into the sky, becoming the sun and the moon. Now that the sun and the moon were in the sky and illuminated the earth, the deities created the third and final form of human beings using white and yellow corn. Corn is the precious substance that ultimately succeeds in producing true and enduring humans.
The myth of the hero twins and the maize god. So again, essentially the maize god and his brother play against the lords of the underworld, play that ball game against the lords of the underworld, and now you sort of understand a little bit the significance of the ball game, right? They lose. The maize god is killed. His head is hung from a cacao tree. He spits in the hand of a woman who becomes pregnant, gives birth to another set of twins. These are the famous hero twins. They're the sons of the maize god. They go down to the lords of the underworld. They play the ball game again against these lords of the underworld, and they win. And they resurrect their father, the maize god. So it's got these elements of death and resurrection, the importance of maize, and also it shows again that the ball game, and that's what's being depicted in that sculpture, in this stucco sculpture. This is depicting the hero twins, and it shows that the ball game was such an important part of Maya ritual, again in the pre-classic. So predates the classic period. El Mirador, they're still excavating it. Could have a pyramid that's covered over in brush. If so, this could be the largest pyramid in the Maya world. All these pyramids, just like in Teotihuacan, were plastered over and painted red. And so they probably had similar problems like we saw in Teotihuacan with deforestation. That's one thing that archaeologists have been looking at. So El Mirador was probably a pretty sizable site. These are some of the other temples that have been excavated. Not too far away is a site known as San Bartolo, which is interesting for really the same kind of reasons that El Mirador is interesting. It's pre-classic, as a lot of the elements that archaeologists thought only existed in the classic, but actually now they know predated, and important elements associated with kingship and the state. Right? This archaeologist, Bill Saturno, was looking for Maya sites in the region. He was told about a site that was a day's hike. He packed food and water for a day. Then, as he says it, 3 days later, when he thought, after he'd run out of food long ago and water, thought he was going to die of dehydration, crawled into a hole, looked up and saw these Maya paintings. And it turns out that he had found the earliest Maya paintings ever found. And these were very, very interesting for many reasons. They depicted some of the basic elements of power of the kings and also blood sacrifice. This is another important element of kingship in the Maya world. What this is was being depicted here is actually a god, probably a god or a king, engaging in auto-sacrifice. As we're going to see, the Maya believed that they owed a blood debt to the gods. They believed that they owed the gods something valuable in order that life continue, and the most valuable thing was blood. They would sacrifice people on temples, as we'll see, but also kings would engage in auto-sacrifice. That is, they would draw their own blood to give to the gods, but also this was a way to communicate with the gods and with the ancestors. So what is actually being depicted here, if you can look at this a little bit closely, is this Maya god is taking a stingray spine and he's piercing his penis. Right? The stingray spine is going right through his genitals, you can see, and blood is pouring out. And with this blood, he's giving this blood back to the gods. And also Maya kings would soak paper with this blood and burn the paper, and would be able to use that to communicate with the ancestral kings or with the gods. So this is an important element of kingship that archaeologists knew about from the classic period, and here's evidence that it is existing at least 150 years or more earlier than the classic period. Right? This is depicting, you can see, the maize god, right? So another element of the Popol Vuh in the creation story, and that essential myth of the Maya, that is the maize god, is also depicted in San Bartolo. You can see here several gods engaging in auto-sacrifice, piercing their genitals with stingray spines, and you have animal sacrifice here next to a sacred tree. Okay, here's a close-up of a god. You can see piercing his penis with a stingray spine, and early Maya glyphs are in San Bartolo, which have not yet been completely translated. Okay, the Maya believed that the world, their world, was essentially the back of a turtle swimming in an enormous ocean. And they usually depicted the world that way. And the maize god being resurrected and coming up from the earth was depicted, you can see here, coming from the back of this turtle. So here's the here's the growing maize god. Right? Here's the maize god as an infant. And also here we can see you can see the dying maize god here being pulled down to the underworld, and then a king sitting on the throne be attended to by someone else, and you can see painted red and white. So again, we can see all in this one mural: blood sacrifice, the maize god, and kingship. Right? And again, it's all depicted on one frieze in one part of the site, and this is one of the reasons why it was so important.
Herno had discovered the oldest Maya paintings ever found, depicting religion and government as far back as 100 BC.
The murals at San Bartolo are really our earliest example of this relationship between God and king, sort of spelled out in this wondrous work of art. And these are the earliest hieroglyphic texts we have in the Maya lowlands. They predate the text that we can read by 5 centuries.
Can you think of an analogy in terms of the impact something like this has?
Well, I mean, essentially this would be like finding sort of the story of Christ, but written at the time of Christ.
News of Saturno's discovery quickly spread to Maya experts everywhere.
Of San Bartolo, where the paintings were found. Essentially, the archaeologist had crawled into a chamber here, and that's where he found these paintings. It was part of a larger pyramid. This archaeologist has also been working with NASA to try and use satellite photos to locate Maya sites. One of the things that they found is that on satellite photos, different kinds of vegetation show up as different colors under certain wavelengths of light. And they saw that on a lot of the known Maya sites, there were these white areas on the satellite photos. And when they investigated further, they saw that there were other areas on the photos that also had these white areas. When they went to those areas, there were Maya sites there. So it turns out that the Maya sites in those areas were altering the vegetation. The vegetation differences were showing up as different colors, and now archaeologists can use that to basically locate Maya sites. So that's been an important contribution to Maya archaeology. Right? As we're going to see, Maya elite power, a lot of it is based on religious authority. Right? Just like the Olmec chiefs, the Maya elites have shamanistic powers. They have supernatural powers. They're somewhat divine. More of their power is based on ritual and religion than it is on economic power or political power. Right? And really, the political power is entwined in their religious power. Even their military power is entwined with religious power. This is something that we're going to see more evidence of. Right? Okay, then we get to the Classic period, and the Classic period is different in some ways than the Pre-Classic. We have evidence of a lot more warfare, but this is also the period that's been more heavily studied, when the Maya glyphs can actually be read, and we have cities that have been excavated for a long time.
Unlike Rome, in the case of the Maya, we're not dealing with one empire. Instead, we're dealing with a series of rival kingdoms.
By the 3rd century AD, Maya civilization was flourishing. No one city ever succeeded in dominating all the others.
The Maya period is one in which you had rival city-states, a lot like in Mesopotamia. It was not like Teotihuacan, where you had really one mega city, one enormous city with no rival. This is a civilization where you have many cities that you can say are comparable size, comparable power, that have alliances with each other, and then sometimes they have wars with each other. The Maya cities in general were large, but not as large as Teotihuacan. So the city center itself might have a few thousand people, and then people in the surrounding countryside and small villages. It wasn't like a mega urban center like Teotihuacan. You didn't have huge marketplaces like you had in Teotihuacan. It was a little bit different in that respect. This is what a Maya village might have looked like based on archaeology, but also based on the way the Maya in some ways still live in that area of the world. The kinds of houses that they live in, the kinds of activities that they have, right? If you were back during the Classic Maya period, you might see the center of the city off in the distance there, right? The Maya villagers would give surplus food to the elites, right? Just like we've talked about in many complex societies. They would also go there for certain rituals and certain activities. One of the most important rituals in the Maya world was the ball game. In fact, the ball game was very, very important. As we've said, it was a ritual in itself, right? That is, it was not just a game. It was a religious event and a reenactment of a myth, right? So it was part sport and part religion. It would be the same way as saying that the communion in the Catholic Church is a recreation of the Last Supper. Essentially, that's what it is. It's sort of reinforcing the values of the religion by recreating one of the important events within the religious story, and it's the same way with the Maya.
The Temple of the Giant Jaguar.
The most valuable monument was one that took a lot of effort. So a big temple pyramid is an indication of your power, your strength, your prestige. It's a way of drawing people into your city because it shows what an awesome, powerful ruler you are.
Building in semi-tropical environments with rudimentary materials was a unique challenge. especially when the goal was to build vertically using Stone Age technology.
Most of the technology that we associate with big stone constructions were unknown to the Maya. They did not have beasts of burden. They didn't have metal tools.
What the Maya did have was a virtually unlimited supply of malleable limestone and a great deal of manpower.
Your labor was one of the things that you were required to give to the king on an annual basis.
Blocks of limestone were quarried and then pushed, pulled, or carried by sheer force to the construction site.
They used something that we call the tump line, and this is a rope that would pass around the forehead, and in that they could carry literally at times hundreds of pounds of debris.
Level by level, the pyramid was built skyward. Wooden scaffolding supported the laborers and the structure as it expanded. Skilled masons shaped the limestone with stone tools and wooden mallets. Though the interior was filled with unrefined rubble, the exterior was deceivingly manicured, covered in a strong mortar known as Maya stucco, and painted red.
Even though they knew of the wheel, even though they knew of metal, they elected not to make practical use of either of these things. And I think in part it was because in their worldview something was much more valuable if a lot of human labor went into it.
At nearly 150 feet, the temple of the giant jaguar emerged, facing west toward the setting sun. The ancient skyscraper would command the attention of all who set foot in Tikal's Grand Plaza as a symbol of power and redemption.
A city like Tikal, which was one of the greatest cities of the Maya world, might have looked like. Now this is a vessel depicting, you can see again, the maize god emerging from the back of that enormous turtle, which symbolized the world. Yeah, the Maya ball game, again, you can still find, like you saw in the movie about Teotihuacan, in some areas of Mesoamerica. It was a reenactment again of the fight of the hero twins against the lords of the underworld who played that ball game. The ball was supposed to look like the sun and the moon, and the hero twins are the ones who become the sun and the moon. It was played where the teams would score points off each other, or I've read in some cases if the ball went through the stone hoop on the side, there were two of them. If it went through one of the stone hoops, it was an automatic win. Not all the time, but on some occasions the losing team would be sacrificed. Again, it was a way to pay the blood debt back to the gods. This is the ball court in Copan, another city we're going to look at. You could kind of imagine that this would have been the scene during the height of the classic Maya civilization, with the king sitting on a throne in his palace overlooking the ball game. There are many depictions of the ball game. They played with a latex ball. There are latex trees in the jungle in Mesoamerica, and they put padding on their hips, like you can see here. It was a game that was played without using their feet, their hands, or their head. They could only bounce the ball off of their hips.
The ball game. The game was played on two levels, within the mythological Maya underworld and here on Copan's ball court. It was a game that often ended in the ritual beheading of the defeated team. The loser's skull sometimes replaced the ball.
The Maya ball game lay at the heart of religious ritual. And when the Copan king took the court against his enemy, they were playing for stakes of life and death. But in this, the one who controlled the ball was the one who was also controlling the sun, for the ball was like the sun, moving in and out of the underworld. And when finally the winner could be determined and the victim was slain, it was his blood, the defeated one's blood, that would seal the deal and keep the sun in perpetual motion.
Maya society not only had an enormous amount of religious power, They also were physically different from commoners, and they also had items that we would consider to be prestige goods that they would use for display to sort of set themselves apart from everyone else in the population. These look like spearheads, and they're made out of flint. They're chip stone, but actually, what's being depicted, these are actually display items. They're not to be used as tools. They were carved with a sort of an intricate design depicting the profile of faces on them. So they're actually meant for display. Right? The Maya also, elites, would have their teeth filed down into different shapes. So they would engage in body modification as a way of setting themselves apart from the commoners. They would have depressions drilled into their teeth and jade inlays placed in their teeth. And when Maya children were young, their heads would be bound, and so that when they were adults, they would have a conical shaped head. Again, this set them off physically from commoners. This is really only something that could be done if you were born into that elite population. You can't deform your head in this way when you're an adult because the sutures are already closed shut. It can only be done when you're a child, so it meant that you had to have been born into that elite society. According to what some of the things that I've read, this conical shape, when the Maya elite would wear a headdress, would sort of give you the appearance of a maize stalk, right? And so it would kind of make you look like a maize stalk here at the top. And as we talked about, the maize god was sacred. So this was again another way of connecting the elites to the mythology and to the religious power. So here we have a Maya elite getting ready for a ceremony. You can see red ochre being spread on his body, jadeite necklace, feathered headdress. He's actually looking in the obsidian mirror over here at his reflection to see how it looks. Right? So display public ceremonies were also very important. These religious public ceremonies, and I'm going to show you a reenactment of one in just a little bit. Of a Maya sacrifice scene that you might have seen from the movie Apocalypto.
It's an extraordinarily potent image for the Maya, and for our king to be wearing this like this on his chest is really a signal to his people that he is in extraordinary ritual context, and they should beware.
This is one of 3 eccentric flints that were found with the jades, actually just outside of that big pot. These represent really a fantastic offering. We've come to the conclusion that they are probably ceremonial spearheads. What we have on this flint is 7 different human faces in profile. So here's the main face. You can see his chin here, his 2 lips, and his nose, and then all of this is an elaborate headdress. But in the headdress are another set of faces. So there are 7 faces on this ceremonial spearhead. We wonder if maybe this means that the king had made 7 human captives for sacrifice during his lifetime. They are literally priceless objects. One expert in lithic technology who came through estimated that it would probably take about 500 hours to make one, but there's no one around today who can do it.
Elite royal tombs found in the Maya world. There have been some, and one of the most important is the tomb of Pakal from the city of Palenque. Right? If you remember the movie, the documentary about Maya writing, Pakal means shield. Right? He's sometimes called Lord Shield. The glyph that represents his name is the glyph for a shield. Right? His tomb was found in a temple that was called the Temple of the Inscriptions by the archaeologists. Pakal was a great builder during his reign in Palenque. The tomb was found by Alberto Ruiz in 1952. Right? These are some of the buildings that Pakal constructed. You can see this is part of a palace complex. This is what it would have looked like back in the day. This is the top of this temple called the Temple of the Inscription, and the archaeologists noticed in the top chamber that there was a floor stone that looked like it was meant to have been lifted open. When he removed that stone, he saw that there was a shaft and started to excavate down this shaft. It was completely filled in with earth. took 3 years to dig down through this shaft, to remove the earth from the shaft until he got down to the final chamber. And in that final chamber was a stone tomb with an enormous stone sarcophagus and this really highly decorated lid you can see depicting Pakal on the world tree descending into the underworld, the Lord of the world of the dead. Inside of the sarcophagus was Pakal's body. There wasn't a lot that remained, but he was covered in all of this jade. You can see a jade death mask. You can see the jade jewelry and jade bracelets, and then spread with red ochre all over. This is the death mask of Pakal. This is a reconstruction of the tomb. And you can see this is actually a bust of Pakal. And it's very, very lifelike, right? Artistically, it's you can say that it's on par with things from Greece and Rome. You get really a good sense of what Pakal might have looked like during his life. Right? And so it shows the power, again, of these Maya elites, one of the greatest rulers in Maya history. The sarcophagus lid, again, you can see it depicts Pakal on the world tree, and he's being sort of sent down into the underworld. This depiction of Pakal has become a piece of evidence, quote-unquote evidence, for the alien theorists to prove that there were ancient astronauts in contact with the Maya. I won't debunk this theory. I'll let someone else do it who does a much better job of it. But what the video shows is what the alien archaeologists say about this piece of Mayan artwork, and then what all the experts who've studied Mayan artwork and used, this is the important thing, have used other pieces of Mayan artwork to interpret and decipher it.
Arguably, the most remarkable Mayan artifact ever found, the stone sarcophagus lid of King Pakal, has produced considerable controversy. Mainstream scholars believe the depiction is of King Pakal on a journey to the underworld. But ancient astronaut theorists believe the king is portrayed seated at the controls of a spacecraft and have dubbed him the Palenque astronaut.
He appears to be going into space. He's the original rocket man. They're manipulating his spacecraft going into space.
We have maintained for a very long time that the depiction here is of King Pakal sitting in some type of a spacecraft, because he is at an angle like modern-day astronauts upon liftoff. He's manipulating some controls right here. He has some type of a breathing apparatus or some type of a telescope in front of his face. His feet are on some type of a pedal. And down here, you have something that looks like an exhaust with flames.
The sarcophagus lid of Pakal has been a centerpiece for the ancient astronaut theories since the beginning. Eric von Däniken believes this to be one of his best pieces of evidence.
And you see his upper hand, he's manipulating some controls. From the lower hand, he's turning something on. The heel of his left foot is on a kind of pedal. And outside of the capsule, you see a linking flame. This is incredible. This is absolutely a proof for extraterrestrials.
The theory rests on the idea that the Mayans were not depicting their usual symbols here, but were trying to realistically depict a rocket with Pakal as its pilot. I think the best thing I can do for you here is to clearly explain what the Mayanists and other scientists who specialize in Mayan culture and artwork believe this scene is depicting. As Ancient Alien said, archaeologists believe this scene is depicting the moment of Pakal's death and his descent into the underworld. Let me show you why they believe that. The most famous symbol in this picture is that of the world tree, which, if you believe Ancient Aliens, would make up the entire hull of the rocket. It's hard to overemphasize the importance of the world tree in Mayan mythology. The idea was that the world tree extended into the heavens with its branches, and its roots extended into the underworld. So, it was a symbol of the bridge between the underworld, heaven, and earth. When it is depicted, it almost always has the double-headed vision serpent on its branches, just like it is depicted here on Pakal's lid. The vision serpent was believed to live at the center of the world. Thus, it is depicted just above the underworld and just below the heavens. In its top branches is the celestial bird, which is seen a little more clearly in other world tree depictions like this one, but on Pakal's lid you can see it's clearly depicting the same bird. The celestial bird represented the heavens, and thus was pictured on top of the world tree. What Ancient Aliens says is the exhaust or fire from the rocket's takeoff is the roots of the world tree extending into the underworld, which is not just typical for the depictions of the world tree, it's pretty much a requirement. In the underworld, we see a picture of the Mayan sun monster, which Pakal is riding into the underworld. The idea was that every time the sun set, it was actually traveling into the underworld, where it would die, like everything else in the underworld. You can even see the bottom half of the sun's face was a skeleton, while the top half still had flesh and had not yet died. This too is a common theme showing the moment of transition. So Pakal is hitching a ride on the sun into the underworld. Even the so-called smoke is easily explained when you understand Mayan symbols. In Mayan art, whenever you see a so-called traveler, which is a person in transition from one world to the next, there must be something that is making that travel possible. Sometimes it's a twisted umbilical cord, but almost always it's a serpent, often a double-headed serpent. In other words, being in the mouths of double-headed serpents was a symbol of transition from one world to the next. You can see that the so-called smoke is actually the traditional serpent's beard, which appears on almost every depiction of a serpent in Mayan art.
This would occur on these temples in places like Tikal. What were some of the public ceremonies like? We're going to see some of the private sacrifice ceremonies of auto-sacrifice that the elites would engage in. But what were some of these public sacrifices like? A lot of the importance, again, of the blood debt to the gods was trying to repay this debt that people felt they owed to the gods. So this would include elite auto-sacrifice, where the elites would let their own blood, and also the capture of people from other cities in order to sacrifice them on some of these temples. So this is a scene from the film Apocalypto, which was a little bit controversial when it came out, but it does a good job, at least in showing what one of these ceremonies might have looked like. So those are some of the possible ways those ceremonies might have looked like. And we're going to look at some Mayan art that depicts some of these ceremonies. So cities like Tikal were enormous, complex cities with elite residences and these major temple complexes. We're going to look a little bit at Copan in more detail. It was another important Maya city. You can see that just like in Teotihuacan, some of these pyramids were enlarged over time as the city got bigger and the power of the temples got larger. Power of elites was based on religion and also based on warfare, and warfare especially as it related to sacrifice. Like we saw in the film about Maya hieroglyphs, for a while archaeologists thought that the Maya were relatively peaceful people. And this started to unravel as archaeologists uncovered more and more depictions of the Maya engaging in warfare. One of the most important scenes of warfare and sacrifice that has been found in the Maya world has been found in a city called Bonampak. Inside one of the temples was a very, very elaborate painting on the interior, decorating all of the walls, that depicted warfare and then the aftermath of warfare, that is the capture of victims for sacrifice. So we're going to look at some of these scenes in a little bit more.
Instead, what Healy found painted on the temple walls was a detailed depiction of the Maya not as peaceful stargazers, but as fierce warriors, devout believers in bloodthirsty deities, devotees of bloodletting and sacrifice. It was a portrait of the Maya that up until that moment seemed unimaginable.
I think, in fact, there is probably no more single powerful painting of warfare and of bloodletting in the world than this battle. It's full of sound and trumpets and screaming and guys who are all painted and pumped up. Some of them are already slain, the decapitated head, this other hunk of flesh. And the key point is right over in the corner of the paintings, where this guy is ripping out the fingernails of that particular captive, and his face is collapsing. He seems to be almost burbling something out of his mouth. Maybe it's blood dripping from where they've ripped out a tooth or two. And the rest of these captives seem now sunk right into their laps, their haunches. They look at their fingers. Blood is spurting right out of them.
This was an image of the Maya neither Eric Thompson nor the world at large could easily accept. Even these shocking scenes didn't immediately overturn the cherished ideal of the peaceful Maya. It was like a parent overlooking some obvious flaw in a child.
When Giles Healy walked into this room, I'm not sure that he knew what to make of it. But when Thompson walked into this room, he didn't see warfare. He saw a nasty little raid. In fact, he even wondered what was going on. The Maya wouldn't rip out fingernails. He thought perhaps there was some pot of red paint over here that people were dipping their hands into. He was that unhappy with it.
You can see some of these depictions of warfare and sacrifice. So there were really two types of warfare in the Maya world. There were wars of conquest, where a city would try to defeat another city's army, but then there were these wars in order to obtain victims or captives in order to sacrifice them on your own pyramid in your own city. The more elite the captive, the better the sacrifice. So if you could actually capture and sacrifice a king from another city, that was the best. And that, in fact, is what happened to one king of Copan, which we'll see, which had really horrible consequences for the city of Copan. But here you can see a captive being pulled by the hair. It looks like an elite because of the conical-shaped head. You can see all of the warriors here and the elite warriors decked out in all their garb. You can see some captives here. This is on top of the temple, which archaeologists, describe these captives waiting to be sacrificed, with their fingernails torn out, right, waiting in pain. There are depictions of ceremony. Here you can see them with these gourds, right, rattles. Other depictions of kings in battle. This is depicting auto-sacrifice of female elites. Right? These women are not actually, it looks like they're eating spaghetti. They're not eating spaghetti. They're passing barbed ropes, right? Ropes with thorns through their tongues in order to draw blood that then is soaking the paper in here, which will be burned in order that they could communicate with their ancestors. Right? Here you can see some, more Maya elites. The temple at Bonaparte. Right? All of the interior walls were decorated with these paintings. Right? Other depictions on top of the temple with sacrifices or captives who were tortured, being waiting to be sacrificed. Here you can see Maya women, elite women with conical shaped heads, standing behind the men with jaguar skins. Right? And here's the full scene from that temple, right? Depicting these captives waiting to be sacrificed, right? So a very, very important part of Maya ritual is based on religion, sacrifice, auto-sacrifice, the connection to the ancestors or the gods, right? So there were really two types of warfare. There was warfare for conquest and then warfare to obtain captives. Right? This is what some of these Mayan warriors might have actually looked like back when they were engaging in this kind of warfare. Okay, so let's look a little bit at the auto-sacrifice and the element of sacrifice of the elites and their connection to the ancestors and also to the gods.
And powerful rulers, they were in competition with each other, and sometimes this competition led to war.
For the Maya, it was war led by kings in the name of the gods.
Maya kings were people like us, but for the Maya, they definitely had attributes of the supernatural.
The price of devotion had brutal and sometimes deadly consequences.
People owed a blood debt to the gods. It wasn't that they didn't regard human life or human blood highly. Quite the contrary. Human blood and human life was the most precious, the most sacred thing that could be offered to the gods in order to repay the blood debt that was incurred at creation.
Bloodletting and human sacrifice dominated the king's strategic thinking. They picked allies and attacked neighbors, all with an eye on appeasing their deities and staying autonomous.
As the living king would walk into the Rosalila temple, he would be entering the realm of the supernatural. This was a sacred cave, a passageway to the underworld and the world of the dead. And it was through ritual acts that the king would be able to communicate then with these dead ancestors. Normally this required bloodletting. It required the king to pierce himself with a stingray spine, either in the genitals, the tongue, or in his ears. This sacred blood was then placed on paper or on cloth, and then was put inside of an incense burner. From this would spew smoke, and it was in the smoke that the king would have his vision, that his ancestor would come forth and share his wisdom and knowledge with him. In Rosalila, we have found the archaeological evidence for these rituals. We have found the incense burners, the stingray spines, jade, flowers, and the incense itself, proving therefore that this was a doorway to those ancient ancestors for the living kings of Copan.
These were monarchs who commanded complex cities, large populations, and vast areas of land. They ruled over their citizens with arrogance and disdain. But what was the source of their authority? Why did their subjects submit to such tyrannical rule?
We keep looking for the underlying source of the power of the kings, searching for economic and political and military power on a fairly grand scale. But the power isn't based in controlling resources or manipulating the economy or mounting large armies. It's based upon belief. That is the power of the Maya kings, and it was a great one, and it achieved great things.
The power of the Maya kings. To understand it, we must follow a trail of blood. A knife made from a stingray's spine. A rope of thorns. These are the keys to comprehending the Maya and the sacred power of their kings. Every portal of every Maya temple is a doorway to the underworld. Inside this temple, it is the duty of both king and queen to reenact the mythical moment of Maya creation. In myth, it was the blood of gods that gave life to man. This was the original act of sacrifice. On earth, the king is as a god. And blood is the price of power, the debt to the gods that must be repaid. Myths and symbols will not suffice. Blood must be shed. And royal blood, drawn from the tongue and from the genitals, from his queen and from himself, forever bound that sacrifice of the gods to the life of man. As his subjects watch, the bloody sacrament of the king spirals upwards to the gods. In return for the sacrifice of royal blood, the crowd believes, the gods will cause the sun to rise, the rains to fall, the corn to grow. For art historian Linda Sheely, these macabre bloodletting rituals provide the final key to understanding the Maya.
In the New World, people believe that your soul, the most potent part of you, the part that's indestructible, the part that you will pass on to your grandchildren and to your great-grandchildren, the thing that is eternal resides in your blood. So if you wish to give an offering that is the most precious and powerful thing on earth, you give your blood. When the king gives his blood, he's first of all giving the most powerful substance on earth, because his blood, because of his ancestry, because of where he comes from, because of the amount of times that he travels to the other world and comes back, his blood is more potent than an ordinary person's.
Remember that the kings had to do rituals of genital bloodletting and self-laceration on a regular basis. So that kind of keeps you honest. You know, I think if we had some genital bloodletting in modern politics, it would thin out the herd and might be a good approach to finding the honest politicians.
In fact, all Maya gave offerings of their blood.
The difference between them and us is we have it easy. We say you can tithe. You can give money out of your pocket. You can give something that doesn't hurt, something that really doesn't cost you anything. The Maya don't let you make that sort of surrogate sacrifice. You really have to give the blood.
And there were other even bloodier offerings. Skull racks commemorate war captives sacrificed to ensure the continuity of the Maya world. Even the ball game served a deadly purpose. The contest, in fact, is not a game at all. Its losers were sacrificed to the gods. The Maya reveled in this terror, even recording the brutality for posterity. This sacrificial victim still emits an eternal howl of unimaginable pain. He has been scalped, disemboweled, his hands and feet mangled. The wood bound to his back is ready for the torch. For the ancient Maya, the blood of kings was the mortar that bound all life together. The king's sacrifice ensured the stability of the Maya world, guaranteeing the sanction of the gods and the belief of the people. He stood at the center of the Maya universe. Remove the king, and the whole system comes crashing down. For Arthur Demarest, the crisis for the classic Maya began the moment they lost faith in their kings.
The source of power is this ritual, this display, the ceremony, the theater, the charisma. And when real problems occur, when a military defeat occurs, even between centers, it can be devastating in a way that it shouldn't have to be. But the authority is based upon belief in the king. And failure is unacceptable. If this really is a holy lord who can manipulate the forces of the universe, then failure undermines the whole system and it can't be adjusted for.
Depicting some of these elements of sacrifice, auto-sacrifice by elites who are offering their blood and also using these rituals to communicate with either the gods or their ancestors. So what's being shown here is a Maya elite woman in front of her husband, the king. She's passing that barbed rope through her tongue, and it's soaking this paper with blood. And here she's burning that paper, and out of the smoke, you can see undulating up, emerges this serpent, and from the head of the serpent emerges this god, and she's communicating directly with this god. So these kinds of ceremonies, like they said in the documentaries, were kind of a way for the gods, or sorry, the kings, to communicate with the gods. It was a supernatural rite. It was a a ceremony that showed that the kings and the queens had supernatural powers, right? They were sort of above ordinary people. This is, again, you could see another depiction of the same queen and king. She's passing the barbed rope through her tongue, and she's standing in front of her husband, King Shield Jaguar. Her name is Lady Choke. Right? Again, this is that same lintel showing the communication between the ancestor or god and the queen. Right? Another depiction of Lady Choke and the king, and here she is presenting the head of a jaguar to her husband. who's his name is Shield Jaguar. A lot of the royal lineages had stela put in front of the temples that indicated when a certain king was born, and also when a king ascended the throne, right? And so there are these birth glyphs and ascension glyphs that were found on a lot of these stela. So elite men and women engaged in these rituals, right? You can see a close-up of the one in Bonampak. Like the documentary said, they also found some of the implements that were used in these rituals, right? So this is an example of a stingray spine, and it's carved with Maya glyphs. And that's the kind of instrument that men would have used to pierce their ear, their tongue, or their genitals, like we saw in the murals at San Bartolo. Okay, so this was a very important element of kingship, and as other archaeologists said, the ritual or religious element of kingship was more important than the economic or the political or even the military aspects of kingship. We looked a couple weeks ago at the Maya writing system, so we're not going to look at that in too much detail. But we talked about how the glyphs work. It's a syllabic system. They had a highly sophisticated calendar. They were able to predict eclipses and follow the path of some of the stars and the planets, right? So really complex elements to their culture. Right? Let's take a look at Copan in more detail. Right? Copan, we know a little bit about the different kings, and we're going to see why archaeologists know about some of these different kings. The dynasty of Copan was probably founded by this king, Yakukmo. Right? One of the most important kings, though, was a king by the name of 18 Rabbit. Right? He was an important king. He built a number of buildings in Copan. What's interesting about 18 Rabbit, though, is the fact that he had a sort of untimely demise, and his demise really was a big challenge to the rulers who came after him, and they had to basically try to come up with a way to strengthen their own position after 18 Rabbit died.
The story of Copan's decline is written between the lines of the 2,200 glyphs carved into the massive stone blocks that form the 90-foot-tall hieroglyphic stairway. The 61st and final step of the stairway is dedicated to 18 Rabbit. He rules for 42 prosperous years. To celebrate completion of Copan's great ball court, one spring day in the year 738, he goes looking for sacrificial victims to play ball. Unfortunately for 18 Rabbit, the tables turn, and the king of Quirigua, one of Copan's vassal cities, captures 18 Rabbit and beheads him. The hieroglyphic stairway, the monument meant to celebrate the divine power of Yashkuk-Mo's dynasty, suddenly takes on a new purpose.
The text of the hieroglyphic stairway is a history of the dynasty, starting with Yashkuk-Mo. But also, interestingly, is a phrase about the decapitation and demise of 18 Rabbit, the 13th ruler, at the hands of Quirigua. And so at that point, then, the stairway seems to become somewhat of a propaganda tool for the dynasty to reestablish its power after that defeat.
Smokeshell, the 14th king of Yashkuk-Mo's dynasty, builds the colossal hieroglyphic stairway to demonstrate his authority and assure his people all is well. But as soon as archaeologists start excavating the stairway in the 1890s, they find its shoddy construction contradicts the propaganda.
The archaeological investigation of the stairway has shown that the mortar the ancient Maya used to put it together originally was some of the weakest at the site. And so the irony of the stairway is that we have this grandiose statement to the power and glory of the Copan dynasty, but it's one of the first buildings to probably collapse.
Over the next 100 years, the power of the dynasty continues to decline. In a last desperate attempt, Yash Pasah, the 16th and final king of Copan, tries to resurrect Copan's former glory by commissioning the carving of Altar Q. Altar Q is the ultimate symbol of the continuity of Yash Kukmo's regime, invoking his power through building, blood, and sacrifice. Now, when David Stewart looks at Altar Q, he's reading the history of real people.
When we were able to actually decipher Maya hieroglyphs, these anonymous characters were suddenly transformed into real people. We now know that they're kings and that on the altar, they're all sitting on their name glyphs. When we can read those names, we can actually read the names of ancient Maya kings. The 16th king's name is Yashpasah Chanyopat.
The sky is newly revealed.
The 15th king's name is Kak Yipiyach Chankawil.
Fire is the strength of the sky god Kawil.
The 13th king's name is Washaklahun Ubak Awil.
18 are the images of the god, nicknamed 18 Rabbit.
The 11th king's name is Kak Uti Chan.
Fire is the mouth of the snake.
The 7th king's name is Balam Nen.
The jaguar mirror. All the figures sit on name glyphs, with one prominent exception. The first figure, the one who anoints the 16th king with the baton of office, sits on the glyph that represents the Maya word, Lord. Years after the other kings were identified, the first figure on Altar Q remained a mystery. Dressed differently from the others, and wearing the eye goggles of the Central American rain god, many Maya scholars believe this figure must surely be a god. Then David Stewart found his name hidden in plain sight.
Ever since we realized this was a king list of Copan, the first figure in the list was always mysterious. We always wondered, where's his name? Who is this guy? And I was here back in 1986 and realized that he's not actually sitting on his name glyph, but rather has his name up in his headdress. And if you look closely, you'll see that he's got a quetzal feather device back here. He has a macaw head on the bird. He has a sun symbol and the symbol Yash for green or blue. And I realized there that they're all four elements of the name. Kin for sun, Yash, and Kuk Quetzal Mo, macaw. Kinich Yash Kuk Mo. That was the name of the founder.
After 150 years of trying to crack the Maya code, the most prominent figure on Altar Q now has a name. Kinich Yash Kuk Mo. Great Sun, Green Quetzal Macaw.
What happened to 18 Rabbit, we can see a little bit better or understand better how elite power worked. Right? 18 Rabbit was captured by a rival city and sacrificed on their temple, and so that weakened the power of the Copan dynasty. It destroyed a little bit of their legitimacy in the eyes of the people, because one of their kings is supposed to have all this power and all this divine authority, was actually captured and killed. And so the later kings were already starting from a point of weakness. And so what they tried to do to compensate for that and rebuild their power was monument building. They engaged in the building of monuments to demonstrate their power, to sort of reassert their power, to legitimize themselves in the eyes of the people. And two of the most important of these monuments are Altar Q and the hieroglyphic staircase. And you saw that Altar Q is this altar which lists and shows the kings in order from the very first king all the way to the king who constructed this altar, Yaxpash. And Yaxpash is receiving authority, right? He's receiving that scepter of authority from the very first king, Yakukmo, right? And so it's sort of showing the circle of leadership. It's showing the line of ancestral kings, and it's basically showing that the current king is connected to the very, very first king. And so ancestor veneration was very important in the Maya, especially among the Maya elites. And so all of the rulers are shown, right, on the four sides, 4 kings on 4 sides for 16 total. Right? You could see 18 Rabbit over here, who's the 13th ruler, right? And that was the one who was killed. And you can see some of the other rulers who were depicted. The last king of Copan had this monument dedicated. Right? Sacrificed jaguars on the altar, and the jaguars were buried right next to the altar. Archaeologists found those jaguar bones. The other important monumental building is the longest hieroglyphic inscription ever found in the Maya world. It's called the Hieroglyphic Staircase, and it's about 72 steps high, 2,200 glyphs, and it's essentially an entire history of the Copan dynasty. So again, it was another way to try and sort of reassert the power of the kings, try to reestablish their power by connecting them to the long history of the Copan dynasty via this monumental building. And this is what it would have looked like back when it was originally built. Okay, so these Maya cities flourished in the jungle from about 200 AD to about 900 AD. But around 750 AD, what you start to see is that the Maya civilization starts to break down and collapse. And it's actually a very complicated system. This is what archaeologists have found. And it's one that's a collapse that has been very, very important in terms of discussing why collapses occur. Something that we're going to hear more of when we have our in-class presentations. Right, on collapse, right? So we're not going to spend too much time focusing on the Maya collapse now. We'll do that more when we have our discussion on collapse, but let's have just a little bit of a background collapse, and we'll look at just one site.
Then, suddenly, these cities began to unravel, one after another. Royal sculptors stopped carving their monuments with historical information, and kings halted their construction projects. Maya civilization had plunged into darkness.
It's not that the entire Maya lowlands is abandoned overnight. It's that, you know, one kingdom falls here and another one 10 years later falls over here, then another one over here.
The causes of the Maya collapse remains a great debate among scholars. We're really talking about a society that was pushing itself to the limits.
The video, one of the ways that they know that the collapse occurred is the abandonment of the sites. They can date the abandonment of these cities. We're going to talk more about that again that last week. We're going to show you just a little bit of evidence of collapse, but they can date the abandonment. And then there's also habitation at these Maya sites post-abandonment, squatters basically, right? So they find trash, garbage in the temples from people who are essentially living there and squatting. The Maya population in that area decreases dramatically. The population really goes down very, very quickly. It doesn't happen in 1 decade or 2 decades. It takes a while, and one city's abandoned, then maybe a couple decades later another city's abandoned. So archaeologists have been trying to figure out what was going on. One city that's kind of interesting, and it sort of shows how things started to break down and the rivalry between cities and how that might have played a role in a little bit of this collapse, is a site called Dos Pilas. What they found in Dos Pilas was they found that before AD 761, you can see up here, was a flourishing Maya city. Right? AD 761, the people of Dos Pilas tore apart their temples in order to construct 2 fortification walls you can see around the city center. And the way archaeologists have interpreted this is that there was an invader from another city, a nearby city, who was going to conquer Dos Pilas, and the people were so desperate and they had so little time, they couldn't go out and quarry stone to build these walls. They just had to basically take whatever stone they could find, and they ended up dismantling their sacred pyramids and their temples in order to build these stones. It didn't work because Dos Pilas was burned and conquered. They've even found ritual artifacts that the priests of Dos Pilas hid so that they wouldn't be conquered. All right, we'll talk more about this evidence again when we have our discussion of collapse. But one last thing I'll point out is an interesting find at Copan, where they found this altar. And this altar, you can see one side has the date 822 AD. The other side of the altar was never completed. Right? And so they say that this, and there's no other monument in the city that dates after 822. So this is the last monument that was started, but it was actually never finished. And they say that that is really the date that Copan collapsed, because there was no reason for this person to finish it anymore. The power of the elites had completely eroded away. Right? Okay, well, after the Maya collapse, there's the sort of post-classic period, and this involves cities in the north. You know, I won't talk about them too much, but we should mention Chichen Itza, just because it is such an interesting site, and probably one of the most interesting buildings in Chichen Itza is this pyramid called El Castillo. Right? El Castillo is really, really neat because of the way that they constructed it and the way that they configured the staircase so that to play with shadows and sort of the elements of feathered serpent, right, which we'll see from the video. So that will conclude this video. We'll review this very, very briefly on Monday. We'll do a little bit on the Aztec and then start getting into the cultures of South America.
The cornerstone of Chichen Itza was the 98-foot El Castillo, or the castle, built in the 9th or 10th century. The 365 steps equal the number of days in the Maya civil calendar. 52 panels on each side represented the Maya's 52-year cycle. 9 terraced levels equaled the 18-month Maya solar calendar. And the temple's axis was perfectly aligned so that specific shadows were cast twice a year.
For any Maya standing and looking at the northwestern sector of the Castillo, they would see a balustrade and then a combination of shadows and the sun hitting that part just before sunset. And then several triangles form. And then at the very bottom of this balustrade, you have a nice carved serpent head, a snake coming down from heaven. And that is indicating the arrival of the rainy season.
The Maya saw this phenomenon as a manifestation of the deity Kukulkan, the feathered serpent.
The Mayas were able to actually record, the equinox. That day in the year where night and day, last the same. Every year, March 21st, you see the descent of Kukulkan.